Welcome to the highlights of the Wednesday conference on November 18th, 2020, with Heather Blumental, social activist and businesswoman, and Mary Kluk, National President of the South African Jewish House of Representatives, and Tali Nates, founder and leader of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. 207 participants joined Professor Dr. Andreas Maislinger at this meeting.
I think that South Africa has come a long way, but it's still a long, long way to go for us to really have equality here. I'm very much a social activist, and I think that it's very important for us to be aware of the disparities that have been in this country and what our responsibility is to try and reach some kind of plateau where we are able to really live as equals. Me being at the Holocaust Center has really resonated with that side of my being, because it allows a safe space for learners who come in from various backgrounds who'd maybe never knew anything about the Holocaust, and be able to see through the lens of the Holocaust things that are happening within their own communities, which are very difficult. And it's being able to create the safe space for people to really talk and have those very hard conversations that we often don't like to have. Amongst all of the organizations that are in South Africa who are able to deal with the true issues that we have in South Africa, and allowing people to talk, to debate, to discuss, and to change and transform their own communities.
The Gedenkdienst program is really, I believe, the best program that Austria has ever done. And this is a quote from Sybil, which I am borrowing. I work with Gedenkdieners for almost 30 years now. I had the first Gedenkdiener I had was a young woman who had won an essay contest. She wasn't really technically a Gedenkdiener, but did come and work at the Montreal Holocaust Memorial Center, where I was the education director in 1993. So from that day until this day, I worked with many different Gedenkdieners. I mean, it's approaching 50. I've had my philosophy towards education, or my pedagogical approach rather, really rests upon peer-to-peer learning. I believe it's the most effective way of teaching. So when I have a young Gedenkdiener speaking to college students here who are more or less the same age, it makes a far greater impression than when I speak to them. This is really, they're like young ambassadors really for us. They're ambassadors to the Jewish community in the sense that I've seen, congregations, that is synagogue congregations, who the Gedenkdieners have spoken to actually be overwhelmed that Austria, quote unquote, has such a program. So, again, it's actually being out in the community that I think is really, really significant.
I've worked with Gedenkdieners probably for the last 20 years, and it has been the most rewarding and outstanding opportunity. I feel that this is an outreach program that Austria should be so proud of. Your young people are true ambassadors. They come with enthusiasm, with a motivation to learn. They come with an excitement to be involved in our educational programs, in research, in program development, in engaging with the public.
both my parents are from Poland. My father is from what used to be the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the Tatra Mountains, the border with Slovakia, Krakow area. And my mother is from Warsaw. And of course, he and his brother, my uncle, survived thanks to Oskar Schindler, but the rest of the family, I must say, did not survive. So my grandmother, my aunts, all the rest of the family were murdered in Belzec or other killing centers, death camps like Treblinka and others. So I grew up always with the story. My father was very traumatized. He was a young child. He was 14 years old when the war started, and he suffered in 4 different concentration camps. And at liberation, he weighed 38 kilograms. So he was a very traumatized individual. He married my mother when he stayed in Germany to study because he had no education. So after the war, he actually stayed in Freiburg. He studied, and he came to Israel in the 50s and married my mother. And finally, just to say that Oskar Schindler himself came to Israel for months at a time. And my father and my mother used to go and see him. And even though they were not wealthy people, they used to collect some money to give to him because he lost everything. He had nothing. He actually did not succeed in anything he did after the war. He tried to be a farmer in Argentina, then he was an insurance broker in Germany. And in the end, the Jews that he saved gave him money to survive. So it's a crazy, crazy story. For your question about Austrians and Germans, it's very, very interesting because I did grow up with a father that was always saying that he's alive because of a German, and that you cannot generalize, and that you cannot say that everyone must go into a box and be locked in it, and that people have choices. So I did grow up with quite, I think, a liberal leaning and a very sort of tolerant and humanitarian kind of outlook because of the experience of someone that appreciated life rather than death. And I think because of my love of history and his humanitarian approach, I turned into history and then, into a career in non-profit and then this museum.
Nelson Mandela was a unique person. He's synonymous with human rights and courage and all sorts of exceptional qualities for everybody globally. There are very few people on the planet who don't associate everything positive with the legacy of Nelson Mandela. So I think it's tough for anybody to fill his shoes in terms of leadership. He did, bring so much gravitas and take this country through an impossible transition. And talking of journalists that Heather was referring to earlier, the South African landscape was in April of 1994 was full of every journalist that was available on the planet, so much so that there was little interest in what was happening in Rwanda at the time, because everybody thought there was going to be a civil war in South Africa. So the transition that we made, a peaceful transition to democracy, was largely due to the person that Nelson Mandela was, and he remains for all of us. Subsequently, we've had a challenge in terms of transitioning from the African National Congress, from a liberation movement into a political party that is now governing 60 million people. So it hasn't been without its challenges. We've had our fair share of corruption. We've had our fair share of all sorts of the dark side of human behavior. But on the bright side, South Africans are an extraordinary people.
Thank you for listening to the highlights of the Wednesday conference of November 18th, 2020. For further details to upcoming conferences, as well as general information about the Austrian Service Abroad, please visit our website www.auslandsdienst.at.